Welcome to the first in a series looking at reducing emissions from seed to shelf. Today we're speaking to Alan Meikle from Hamlyns, who tells us about changes they've made to reduce carbon emissions.
We've been around in this area for over 100 years. We've set up in Portsoy originally. We were a little local mill, and like hundreds of little local mills, we were the local mill for the area. Over the years it's obviously got bigger. We moved 3 mills along the road to this site at Boyndy, and we've been here since last 30 odd years. We use about between 60 and 100,000 tonnes depending on the year of Scottish milled oats, which encompasses gluten-free, organic and standard. Paul's testing a load of oats we've just had in last 5 minutes, and what we're looking for in that is we're looking for big bold oats. So from a farmer's perspective, high bushel weights. We're looking for moisture, which is below our specification, 15%, and we're looking for a lot less fines. But in a major element is the big bold oats, because if you do a quality oat on the way in, you get a quality end product. The other aspects, things like infestation, etc., Paul will test, and those things obviously will mean that the oat will be rejected. But assuming the oat is acceptable, it's big bold oats is what we're looking for. Yes, oats by their nature do not have any gluten in them. Gluten-free oats are primarily because they contain no wheat and barley. Now, as everyone knows, when you're growing something, you will have something in the field, whether it's wheat, barley, could come from lack of roguing, could come from admixture from previously, could come from a bird dropping something in there. But when you're a gluten intolerant person, you're either at one end of the spectrum, which might mean if you have a little bit of gluten, not do you too much of a problem, or at the other end of the spectrum, when potentially you could die. So you have to assume that everybody who's consuming gluten-free is at that end of the spectrum. So we're looking for something that is clear of wheat and barley and rye. And the way we do that is we ensure that we get them from farms that are completely clear of wheat and barley in terms of the last 3 years in their rotations. We have tractors, trailers, combine harvests, etc., which are primarily for gluten-free oats. We then put them into stores. We transport them with lorries that contain nothing else but gluten-free oats, and we then bring them in a special run. We don't bring them through this particular intake system, which is a standard intake system. We have a special intake system for gluten-free, which misses out all the silos, elevators, conveyors, etc. We then stop the mill and completely clean it all down. Once we've done all of that, we put everything back together again, bring in the gluten-free oats, and then start a run of gluten-free. And in our case, that run runs for about 7 days, and we do nothing else for the first 3-4 hours. We take the product and put it into standard, so we take the first X amount of tonnes into standard, then we do gluten-free. Once we've finished making it, that's not the end of the job. What we've got to then do is test every single pallet. We test every single pallet to ensure that what we're producing is actually what we say we're producing. So every single pallet goes out with a certificate. Obviously we can't move it until it's been tested, and it takes externally about 2 to 3 weeks to get tested. So everything will sit here and it will be positive release at the end of the day. Milling process is quite simple. You take an oat out of the field. Oat out of the field has an inner part and an outer part. We separate the outer part and anything else that comes in with it, sticks, stones, etc., and we're left with the inner part. The inner part we put through a kilning process to kill the enzyme activity, and then we make it into the final product. And very briefly, how you make the final product is if you want to make porridge oats, you cut it a number of times to make pinhead and then squash it to make porridge oats. If you want to make muesli flakes, you take the biggest of those, squash it to make muesli flakes, and if you want to grind it for flour, you grind it up and it makes meals and flours, and it can be anything from fine, medium, coarse, whatever you're looking for. About 15 years ago, we stood back and looked at our business way before carbon offsetting and things like Save the Planet, etc. were truly the words they are just now. We looked at our business and said, where are the major cost drivers and what can we do in order to change things? And the things that we identified is a milling process, oat milling process, use a huge amount of energy. So we looked at it, we're in the northeast of Scotland, it's windy, and we decided we could utilise that, so we put in a big 2.3 megawatt wind turbine. That produces enough energy for us for the year, so basically that wind turbine produces everything we need to run this plant for a year. So that was the first thing. The second thing we looked at was utilisation of other energy sources, so things like gas and oil. The first thing was oil. We were using a lot of oil on burners, etc., so we transferred that into gas and brought gas 5 miles down the road underneath the ground. and that changed us from oil into gas. So at that time, that was a better source. Looking forward, we might be able to use something completely different. We also looked at our whole operation. So we looked at packaging, and we were using a huge amount of plastic packaging. We've in the last year or so moved just about everything across to paper packaging. So now everything we produce for the retailers, whether it's branded or own label, is going into paper packaging. So hopefully we've done our little bit. There's still bits we can play with. Energy consumption, things like lights, etc. are obvious. Take all the way the normal lights and replace them with energy efficient lights, energy efficient motors, all that sort of thing. But those are the three main bits. While we were looking at reducing it to start with, it was all under the umbrella of being commercially right for the business, because it's no use saving the planet and the business goes bust. So all of the things I've explained, whether it be the wind turbine, whether it be the changing across the packaging, etc., has to be commercially correct. One of the things that we produce here, we take the oat, we take the outer husk off, so the outer husk gets mixed with all the extraneous materials from our production process, ground up, pelletized, put into pellets and sent off on lorries to a number of different places. Those are not local places to here. So we're using a huge amount of transport, a huge amount of oil, etc. down the road. We can do better than that, because we can utilise that and we could burn it into our boilers and use it for steam raising. At the moment, we'll be looking at it for 7 years, we're not quite there yet, but we will get there. And that'll be the next step in our journey down that road.
The green credentials of oats are well known, giving good yields in less productive soils and also requiring less emissions-laden inputs, such as nitrogen fertiliser, than many other crops. Sandy Cowan, a winter oat breeder from Ibers, Aberystwyth University, talks to us about growing oats.
You probably want oats maybe 1 year and 4, no closer than that, depending on what your own rotation is, but 1 year and 4, maybe wheat, barley, then oats, or wheat with another crop in there, but 1 year and 4 for oats would be probably as close as you want to be. Oats are fairly well known for being more tolerant of poorer quality soil, so they'll grow well in areas that other cereals might not grow. But obviously, if you have a more fertile site, then oats will grow well there. You might have to watch a little bit more with lodging, so there are certain things that you could do, either applying plant growth regulators or timing of fertilizer, or looking at seed sowing rates to minimize your risks of lodging if you're in a fertile area. But generally, oats tend to like more moisture, so really avoid a very free draining soil, but it will depend a bit on the farm and its specific weather conditions. For growing oats in Scotland, we've got some trial sites that are run for us up in Glenrothes, so they always like to sow winter oats the last week in September, and probably for the spring oats you'd be looking to try and sow them as soon as you can, weather conditions permitting, so probably the end of March, early April. In generalities, you're probably looking for winter oat maybe 9 tonnes per hectare, for spring oat 7 tonnes per hectare. To achieving good yields, I think that's down really to the farmer knowing their own conditions, knowing maybe having a bit of experience with oats. Oats are generally a lower input. I imagine in Scotland that mildew is probably going to be more of an issue than crown rust. And we're also trying to breed newer varieties which are mildew resistant rather than mildew tolerant. So there's bits to look for there. So variety choice is a little bit. Have a look at the recommended list or speak with your agronomist about variety choices that might be more suited to your specific location.
So, with all this talk of oats, just what is Alan's top tip for making that northeast favourite, skirlie?
So my top tip for making skirlie is to start with the best raw material. If you start with the best raw material, then there's a number of different ways you can use it, but you'll end up with a good quality product at the end.